When you look at a world map, have you ever really stopped to think about how it got carved up into the countries we know today? We totally take the idea of nations for granted, but trust me, it wasn't always this way. In this explainer, we're going to dig into how the very idea of the nation was born and how it completely changed the face of Europe, really setting the stage for the world we live in right now. So, check out this incredible print from 1848 by a French artist named Frédéric Sérieux. This thing captures a really powerful dream. It's this utopian vision of a world made up of democratic and social republics. And look closely. You can see people from all over Europe and America marching. But they're marching as distinct nations, each with their own flag, all filing past a Statue of Liberty. And down in the foreground, you've got the shattered remains of crowns and symbols of the old monarchies, just lying there, broken. For its time, this was an absolutely radical vision. Now, the key idea here, the big one, is the nation-state. Before this whole period, you had multinational states, kingdoms and giant empires that ruled over lots of different nations or peoples. Just think of the Habsburg Empire. It was this huge patchwork of Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, and so many others, all held together simply because they were loyal to one emperor. The nation-state smashes those two ideas together. The political territory, the state, becomes the home for a single people who all share a common identity. Right, so before 1789, Europe was basically a continent of these huge dynastic empires. Your loyalty was to a king, not to a nation. Then, one single event lit a match and started a fire that would spread across the entire continent: the French Revolution. The French Revolution was really the first clear example of modern nationalism in action. The revolutionaries didn't just get rid of a king, they actively started to build a new, shared French identity from the ground up. They came up with these powerful new ideas like la patrie, the fatherland, and le citoyen, the citizen, which created this sense of a community of equals. They ditched the old royal flag for the tricolor. They created a national assembly to represent the people. And they even pushed the Parisian dialect of French as the common language to tie the whole country together. And then along comes Napoleon. As his armies marched all over Europe, sure, they brought conquest, but they also acted like messengers, spreading these revolutionary ideas. The Napoleonic Code, for instance, was a total game changer. It established equality before the law and got rid of all the old feudal privileges everywhere it went, from Italy all the way to the German states. But of course, the old powers of Europe, the monarchies and the empires, they weren't just going to stand by and watch this happen. After Napoleon was finally defeated in 1815, they decided it was time to try and turn back the clock. So, in 1815, you've got the leaders of Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria all meeting at the Congress of Vienna. And their goal, led by this super conservative Austrian chancellor named Metternich, was simple: hit the undo button on the French Revolution. They put the old monarchies back on their thrones and created what was called the Metternich system, basically an international club designed to stamp out the dangerous ideas of liberty and nationalism wherever they popped up. This cartoon from 1820 just nails the whole vibe of the time. It shows a club of thinkers, but, and this is the key part, they're all wearing muzzles. A plaque on the wall lists the #1 rule of this society: silence. This perfectly shows you what these new conservative regimes were all about. They relied on censorship, secret police, and autocratic rule to crush anyone who disagreed with them. But you can't just kill an idea, right? Despite all the repression, nationalism wouldn't go away. It just went underground. Revolutionaries started forming secret societies to keep fighting for liberty and nationhood. And one of the most famous was this Italian guy, Giuseppe Mazzini. His vision of uniting all the Italian states into one single democratic republic was so threatening that Metternich himself called him the most dangerous enemy of our social order. So you've got this massive tug of war between the old conservative order and these new exciting forces of nationalism. Something had to give. And boy, did it ever, exploding in a series of revolutions across Europe led by people who were getting more and more restless. And these revolutions weren't just about politics. Culture played a huge part in fanning the flames. Just look at this dramatic painting by Delacroix, showing a massacre during the Greek War of Independence. This was all part of the Romantic movement, which was this big artistic and intellectual shift that focused on emotion, folk culture, and shared heritage. It basically became a powerful engine for nationalism. And art like this created massive sympathy for national struggles, helping to rally public opinion across the whole continent. And what pours gasoline on this cultural fire? Well, people were struggling, big time. The 1830s and 40s were really tough decades, with bad harvests, a growing population, and tons of unemployment. All this misery created a desperate population that was absolutely ready for radical change. All of this just explodes in the Great Revolutionary Wave of 1848, what they called the Springtime of the Peoples. All across Europe, liberals from the educated middle classes thought this was their moment. You see this image here? That's the Frankfurt Parliament, where 831 elected representatives tried to draft a constitution for a united Germany. But here's the thing. This attempt to build a nation from below, through debate and discussion, it ultimately failed. They didn't have a real army, so their power was just an illusion. When the Prussian king turned down their offer of a crown, the old guard simply sent in the troops and shut the whole thing down.
The failure of 1848 taught everyone a really brutal lesson. Idealism and speeches just weren't enough. And this is where our story takes a massive turn. The conservatives started to realize that nationalism was a force too powerful to just ignore. They figured, if we can't crush it, maybe we can co-opt it for our own purposes, using its power to build strong, unified states, not from the bottom up, but from the top down.
The undisputed master of this new, hardcore, pragmatic approach was this guy, Otto von Bismarck, the chief minister of Prussia. He was a political realist who famously said that the great questions of the day would not be decided by speeches and majority decisions. That was the mistake of 1848, but by iron and blood. And he wasn't kidding. Under Bismarck's leadership, Prussia, with its powerful army and super efficient bureaucracy, basically took charge. He masterminded 3 short, decisive wars over 7 years, picking fights first with Denmark, then Austria, and finally France. Each victory pulled more German states into the fold, forging a nation not with ideas, but with strategy and military force. That final victory against France leads to this incredible moment. On January 18th, 1871, right there in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, the symbolic heart of the old French monarchy, the Prussian king, William I, was proclaimed German emperor. A new, powerful nation had been created right in the center of the continent, not by liberal ideals, but by pure military might. Now, a really similar story of unification from above was playing out down in Italy. For centuries, Italy wasn't really a country, more of a geographical expression, as they said, just a patchwork of little states. Its unification was driven by this trio of amazing figures. You had Cavour, the brilliant diplomat. He was the head. Then there was Garibaldi, the passionate revolutionary general. He was the sword. And finally, King Victor Emmanuel II, who became the monarch of a united Italy, the crown. And these maps just show you how fast it all happened. On the left, you see Italy in 1858, totally fragmented. Now look at the right. Just 12 years later in 1870, you've got a unified kingdom. It was a stunningly rapid and dramatic process, and it was achieved through a mix of Cavour's clever diplomacy and the military victories of Garibaldi's volunteer army. This famous cartoon captures the whole dynamic perfectly. Here you've got Garibaldi, the revolutionary, helping King Victor Emmanuel pull on a boot, which is, of course, shaped just like the Italian peninsula. It's the perfect symbol of that joint effort between revolutionary passion and monarchical ambition that ultimately created the nation of Italy. So by the late 19th century, the political map of Europe had been completely redrawn. But what did it really take to forge these new nations, to make them feel, real to the people who actually lived in them?
Well, it's worth remembering that not every nation was born in this kind of revolutionary fire. The story of Great Britain, for example, is totally different. It wasn't one big event, but a long and, let's be honest, often forceful process where the English nation slowly extended its political and cultural influence over the Welsh, Scots, and Irish to create the United Kingdom.
And finally, once these nations were created on the battlefield and in parliaments, you had to get people to believe in them. They had to be imagined into existence. So artists gave a face to the nation by creating powerful allegories, like Germania right here. These heroic female figures like Marianne in France or Britannia in Britain gave a solid, inspiring form to the abstract idea of a nation, and that helped forge a deep, emotional connection among its people. So the big takeaway is that this whole 19th century process, driven by ideas, culture, revolution, and war, literally built the world of nation-states that we all live in today. But that leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. In our modern, ever-changing, globalized world, what does it truly mean to be a nation?